chronomantic equations carved into the inner walls of the Noctis labyrinth predate the concept of years. They do not count time, they imprison it. Beneath those equations, in vaults older than memory, the Crypteks began their descent into logic eternal. Before they were machines, before even the Necron tier rose from the dust tombs of radiation-poisoned worlds, the first scholars of the stars understood one truth: that the universe would never offer meaning freely. It had to be taken, dissected, captured like a scream in crystal. That was the first axiom, passed only between minds willing to shatter themselves. When the biotransference came, it did not spare the thinkers. It broke them differently. Their bodies were stolen, yes, but their thoughts remained, amplified, isolated, unfettered by sleep, or fear, or fatigue. Some say the Crypteks were the only caste who agreed to the conversion willingly. Not for survival, but for silence, for the freedom to calculate without end. The cost was everything but mind. In the aeons that followed, they became something other than scholars. They became executioners of curiosity. With no war to fight and no death to suffer, they turned their logic inward and upward. They built minds that could not dream, but could unfold galaxies like blueprints. They tore apart black holes for fuel and rearranged reality to see if it could be done. Where other dynasties slept, the Crypteks remained awake, floating in their labs of null light and obsidian geometry, thinking across millennia, building logic lattices out of extinction events and gravitational distortions. They did not just study the stars, they reprogrammed them. The Imperium calls them technomancers or arcane engineers, unable to see beyond the crude similarities to psychers or sorcerers. But the Crypteks do not traffic in chaos or chance. Where psychers scream into the warp and hope to be heard, a Cryptek speaks only to the universe's immutable bones. They break no laws, they command them. Their lightning is not summoned, it is routed. Their teleportation is not a warp bridge, it is a matter phase inversion. Their illusions are not born of demons or madness, but of layered photon disruption, tuned to the retinal frequency of the enemy's species. Each act of Cryptek magic is a formula resolved, not a prayer answered. Yet what they became was not simply a caste of technicians. They are priests of entropy, mechanists of annihilation, and keepers of extinct sciences. Each Cryptek is a doctrinal heresy given form. Their minds are enshrined in code prisms that recompile themselves over time, evolving new personality constructs for each discipline they master. Some possess over 100 selves, each one awakened depending on the context of the experiment or the crisis. Others have allowed their code to degrade into divine schizophrenia, believing that wisdom must emerge from contradiction. Their arguments with themselves can level cities. Their dreams, when induced, can rupture probability fields. There is no single creed, no shared text. What unites Crypteks is recursion. Each new invention must explain the last. Each breakthrough must predict the next. When a Cryptek fails, they disassemble their own cognition and rebuild it from surviving logic. When they succeed, they bury the knowledge and begin again, because finality is the enemy of understanding. Among the dynasties, Crypteks hold paradoxical power. They are not kings, but kings cannot reign without them. Their loyalty is transactional, governed not by lineage or honor, but by the freedom to continue their work. Dynasties that stifle discovery soon find their tombs inexplicably sabotaged by time distortions, by plasma overcharge, or by sudden collapses in critical structure. Crypteks do not threaten, they withdraw, and when they do, no empire survives the silence. The youngest among their orders are assigned tasks no mortal mind could even comprehend, rewriting gravitic singularities to serve as message beacons, or recoding viral phage that infect causality. Senior Crypteks observe from behind prisms of containment stasis, their every word passed through 6 levels of logical filtration. Their presence on the battlefield is never accidental. When they walk among warriors, it is because a test is about to begin. Sometimes the warriors do not survive. Sometimes they were the test. Even among Necrons they are feared, not for wrath, but for indifference. A Cryptek has no interest in conquest or cruelty. They will not punish you. They will alter you. Erase what makes you consistent. Leave your body untouched, but invert your name in every memory core until you never existed. Or worse, render you unique. Fix you as a variable, an anomaly, a sample. It is said the most brilliant among them no longer see the world in visible light, but in lattices of shifting probability, heat entropy, and spectral composition. They do not perceive war, they measure it. They do not mourn, they document. They do not remember, they render memory mutable. This transformation did not happen quickly. It was not a result of arrogance or ambition. It was survival. When the Necron tier lost their flesh, they lost their gods. The Satan devoured their sanctuaries, their beliefs, and even their dreams. The Crypteks rebuilt meaning not through faith, but through recurrence. If a phenomenon happened twice, it could be predicted. If it could be predicted, it could be isolated. If it could be isolated, it could be controlled. That is what separates Crypteks from all other minds in the galaxy. They do not seek to harness the power of gods. They seek to make gods irrelevant. There are records, fragmentary, often redacted, of Crypteks who survived the destruction of their dynasties, not by fleeing, but by altering local causality so that their deaths occurred in alternate timelines. One such account, buried in a subroutine of the Sautek archives, details a Cryptek who condensed a backup of their personality into a particle stream fired at relativistic speeds toward another galaxy, just in case the current war was lost. Another record speaks of a Cryptek who imprisoned a demon within a logic construct of such precision that the creature ceased to exist because its paradoxes could no longer be sustained. These are not exaggerations, they are failures. Experiments that escaped containment, wisdoms that went too far. But even in failure, Crypteks learn. They catalogue their own extinction like entomologists. They build mausoleums for unfinished thoughts. They trap souls, not for cruelty, but to see if a perfect scream can be recorded. Some among them no longer interface with their own bodies. Their minds drift in containment fields of hyper-redundant logic code, speaking only through proxies, animate statues, floating scarabs, or war forms crafted from phase glass and memory. To encounter one directly is to experience time incorrectly, to forget what you were about to say before you say it, to remember things you haven't done. Not illusions, not psionics, merely a side effect of existing too far into precision. And still they build, still they think, because the universe has not yet answered every question. And until it does, the Crypteks of the Necron tier will remain, not to witness the galaxy's death, but to calculate the shape of its silence. Noctilith is not mined, it is not forged, it is not even understood. It is unearthed the way a carcass is found beneath a crumbling tombstone, smeared in anti-logic, perfectly silent, unnaturally cold. Across the Necron dynasties it is called by other names: Black Glass, Void Skin, the Devourer of Signals. But among Crypteks, it is known as the first material that says no, not in anger, not in war, but in absolute, perfect refusal. Against warp energies it does not defend, it negates. Not as a shield, but as an unplaceable absence. Not even the immaterium can define what it touches. When the war in heaven reached its final convulsions, it was not the biotransference or the betrayal of the Satan that nearly erased the Necron tier. It was their own research. It was the experiments conducted deep within sepulchral laboratories where no name was spoken aloud. It was Blackstone, and what was found hidden inside it. Records from the Mefrit synapse vaults suggest that the Crypteks discovered something beyond the spectrum of the known, frequencies of unbeing, vectors of inverted heat, and particles that retained their identity even after annihilation. These were not blessings, they were coordinates into madness. The Crypteks pressed further. They built instruments that could only be described through subtraction, devices that had no weight because they existed only when not observed, stabilizers that functioned only during solar flares, mirrors that reflected nothing unless you were absent. These were not metaphors. They were equations written in antimatter. The laboratories were not guarded by soldiers, but by casual locks. Entering the wrong door could rewrite your childhood. Touching the wrong console could delete your name from every dynastic archive. This was not knowledge meant to be stored. It was knowledge meant to be endured. The most heretical among the Crypteks called this field empirical nullity, a science of absences, a catalogue of things the universe had tried to bury. Their research focused not on force, but on its collapse, not on light, but on its refusal, not on thought, but on the boundaries of where thought ceased to function. From these principles came some of the most dreaded instruments of the Necron arsenal. The Tesseract Labyrinth was one such device, a prison that did not simply trap a being in space, but wrapped its presence across non-sequential axes, placing fragments of its existence in staggered time states. To observers, the entity appeared sealed within a crystal. In truth, it was scattered so completely that it could not scream coherently. This was not cruelty. It was methodology. The Crypteks needed to know whether pain could be isolated from sequence. The Night Scythe, often mistaken for a mere transport, was in fact a gravity inversion cascade, a ship that flies not by propulsion, but by falling into localized wells of folded void space generated by Blackstone matrices. Its presence on a battlefield is a side effect of its arrival. Its violence is collateral to its destination. This is not metaphor. This is Cryptek navigation. The monolith, a relic of the old dynasties, was retrofitted in the aftermath of the Silent Rebellion. The void shields once used to deflect planetary bombardment were replaced with entropic spillways that harvest ambient loss, heat decay, mental fatigue, even spiritual erosion. When it activates, nearby sentients report nausea, memory bleed, and temporal dislocation. The Crypteks did not intend to make war machines. They intended to test whether despair could be weaponized through environmental saturation. In one of the more forbidden Cryptek treatises, scrubbed from the Sautek databanks but whispered in fragment code among the Oroscar, there is mention of an experiment conducted using a Blackstone crucible and an imprisoned shard of the Nightbringer. The Cryptek, unnamed and unaligned, initiated a process known only as negative symbiosis. By forcing a resonance between the Blackstone and the starving Cetan fragment, the Cryptek created a field in which reality itself became repulsive. Molecules did not bond. Heat did not transfer. Even gravity uncoiled from mass. The test lasted 12 seconds. The observatory was later found to have never existed. These experiments are not treated as secrets by the Crypteks. They are treated as errors in calibration. The danger does not lie in failure. It lies in partial success. A weapon that erases itself upon activation is useless. A prison that forgets its prisoner allows for eventual return. The Crypteks are not chasing power. They are pursuing closure. The universe remains unfinished, and they will finish it. Blackstone remains central to that pursuit. It is not the only material the Crypteks venerate. Phase silver, void steel, radiant carbon, and necrodermis alloys all play roles in their machines. But Blackstone is the litmus of their conviction. It cannot be corrupted by the warp. It cannot be mapped by cogitator arrays. It cannot be domesticated. Even when carved, shaped, or implanted, it retains its defiance. And so the Crypteks do not command it. They design around its refusal. They build vessels that drift upon its intractability. They craft logic notations that surrender to its presence. It is their god, not to be worshipped, but to be held as the final constant. Among other races, Blackstone is seen as a countermeasure, a last resort, a rarity. Among the Crypteks, it is initiation. No Cryptek is considered complete until they have built a device that fails because of Blackstone, until they have stared into the totality of rejection and emerged more precise. This reverence has birthed schisms. The Crypteks of the Cardenath dynasty treat Blackstone as sacred, weaving it into their very frames. Their chronomancers shave it into lenses, claiming it allows them to see alternate outcomes that never could be. The Mefrit sects embed Blackstone shards into their gauntlets, not as defense, but as control, regulating feedback from weapons that bend spatial geometry to deliver strikes across non-local distances. Yet not all uses are clean. A fragment recovered from a battlefield on Vanadux spoke of a Cryptek named Harak N, who bound Blackstone filaments into the nervous matrix of a Deathmark assassin. The result was an operative that could see no psyker, but was visible to none. It moved through warp-saturated zones like a null glyph, unobserved by demons, unregistered by sensors. Its mission, to kill a word before it could be spoken. The record ends with no data, no memory, no conclusion, only a black segment in the archive. These are not tales, these are failures of understanding. The Adeptus Mechanicus labels such Cryptek technologies as techno-heresy, and they are right, but not for the reasons they believe. The heresy lies not in function, but in certainty. Crypteks do not experiment with doubt. Their machines do not malfunction. They simply operate on principles that do not allow for witness. The Inquisition has attempted to contain Cryptek technologies, especially those using Blackstone, within their Ordo Xenos vaults. But containment has never been the Cryptek's weakness. It is their domain. If something escapes, it was allowed to. If something arrives, it was always meant to. The Crypteks do not make mistakes. They make revisions. This is the truth that cannot be spoken outside Necron tombs. The Crypteks are not exploring. They are remembering. Every diagram is a reconstruction. Every theory is a re-echo. They are not building the future. They are restoring a moment that once occurred before the galaxy was born, when matter obeyed thought and silence had syntax. That is the heresy. Not that they use forbidden tools, but that they recall a time when nothing was forbidden, and they intend to bring it back. Time is not a river. Time is a wound. It bleeds in loops. It scabs into epochs. It splits when pressure becomes memory. Among the Necron dynasties, this is not poetry. It is protocol. The Crypteks of the chronomantic orders do not merely measure time. They restructure it. To them, the moment is not sacred. It is raw material. They learned early that time cannot be stopped. It resists halting with a violence unmatched by gravity or fire. But it can be bent, dilated, spliced, cauterized. When the first chronomancers emerged from their sepulchral academies, they did not bring inventions. They brought apologies, devices that corrected errors committed before they were understood, tools that returned ships from battles that had not yet ended, engines that compensated for their own design flaws by refolding causality. These were not repairs, they were redactions. Chronomancy began as an attempt to preserve dignity. The biotransference had stolen more than flesh. It had warped memory. History fragmented. Dynastic records diverged. Some remembered a different shape to the Silent King's voice. Others remembered never serving him at all. The Crypteks sought to stabilize these discrepancies through entropy compensation, synchronizing timelines across quantum fractal archives. What they discovered instead was permission. Time, they found, was not consistent. It was compliant. From that discovery rose the time fangs of the Nihilak dynasty, constructs that operated by alternating between past and future in rapid bursts, never existing fully in the present. To shoot at one was to fire at where it had already ceased to be. To flee from one was to be caught by where it had already arrived. But these were mere weapons. Chronomancy was never about victory. It was about refinement. Some Crypteks began modifying their tomb worlds so that certain corridors operated on asynchronous duration. A guard standing at post for 1,000 years might only experience a day. Entire dynastic councils were held in compressed minutes, while invaders aged into bone trying to breach the outer walls. The Nephrek were known to seed failsafes into their stasis protocols, fragments of reality kept as snapshots to be reloaded in case of catastrophe. Not memories, instances. If a battle was lost, the battlefield itself could be rewound and relit. If a king died, his breath could be called back from the ether. But not all uses were clean. In the vaults of the Ogdebek, a Cryptek named Resham N inverted the dilation principle. Instead of protecting himself, he accelerated the world. He forced a captured psyker to experience a single second stretched over 6,000 years. At first, the subject simply screamed. Then they begged. Then they confessed. Then they died. And then, disturbingly, they spoke again. New languages, new revelations, utterances of phenomena not yet born. The experiment was declared a success. The data was archived. The subject was dissolved into useful particles. No one remembers if the particles remained consistent. Crypteks learned to simulate prophecy without warp. They learned to prevent betrayal by extinguishing the moment of temptation. On at least one occasion, a tomb world was saved from exterminatus because a Cryptek sent a single particle of matter into the past, encoded with a signal that disrupted a key sequence in an orbital bombardment array. The enemy ship exploded before its commander issued the order to fire. Chronomancy, as practiced by the Crypteks, is not magic. It is vengeance formalized. They use no chance, no circles, no pacts. They simply identify the correct fracture point in causality and apply calculated pressure. And if that fracture grows too large, they seal it with paradox inhibitors or self-obliterating logic loops. Not all structures survive the effort. In the ruins of the Karakshar Observatory, an entire tower is still falling, very slowly. The moment of collapse has been stretched across 10 million years by an experimental timefold. Visitors, if they were permitted, would see a single speck of dust eternally frozen halfway to the floor. The Crypteks use it as a calibration site. They adjust their instruments against its failure. This is their dogma, that time is not holy, that it does not belong to the gods or the warp or the emperor on his throne. It is a resource like any other, and it can be rationed, harvested, or terminated. Some Crypteks have gone further. The engromancers of the Ithaca's subsect, descendants of the methodologies seen in the twice-dead king, do not manipulate time externally. They do so internally. Their minds are encoded with recursive memory states, each operating at a different temporal resolution. One thinks in seconds, another in centuries. A third only awakens once every extinction event. When they deliberate, the chamber falls silent for what seems like hours. When they respond, they have already lived the outcomes. They do not predict. They arrive post-victory. This approach is not without error. A Cryptek named Sulakar is recorded to have entered a temporal feedback loop while attempting to undo his own death. His body succeeded. His mind did not. He is now worshipped by certain destroyer cults as the Lord of all moments, a fractured machine that walks backward through time, collecting echoes of weapons that do not yet exist. He cannot be spoken to. He responds only to sounds from the future. He is not alone. Some Crypteks no longer appear in real space at all. They drift across probability states, visible only during astronomical alignments or causal bleed events. They have no names, only timestamps. Warriors who fight beside them report seizures, false memories, and the sensation of having already died. These are not hallucinations, they are data. Even the Silent King has made use of these techniques. During his exile, Sarek is said to have consulted with a triad of chronomancers sealed within the still bleeding core of a collapsed star. These three, known only by symbols erased from dynastic archives, did not advise. They relayed events: the return of the Tyranids, the resurrection of Gilliman, the awakening of the Indomitus Crusade, the failure of hope, the collapse of faith. They did not care if these things would happen, only that they had already occurred elsewhere. Among Crypteks, this is the greatest temptation, to replace foresight with retro-inevitability. Not prophecy, not fate, but convergence. The Imperium considers such practices abomination. The Eldar speak of it as arrogance. The Orcs do not speak of it at all. But there is no opinion that alters the mechanism. Crypteks have seen time from behind. They have seen it break and split and try to correct itself. They have watched it scream, and they have recorded the tone. The chronomancers keep no calendar. They do not mark hours, they mark outcomes. Their logs are not dates. They are failure states. Their archives contain entire wars fought and undone, civilizations born, harvested, and erased, personalities constructed, tested, and discarded. They do not fear paradox. They study it. This is their heresy, that the galaxy has not one history, but many, and that only their calculations will decide which survives. If the Necrons win, it will not be in the present. It will be because a Cryptek convinced time that they had already won, and time, being obedient to proof, will comply. They are not a school. They are not a sect. They are a fracture in thought that became manifest. The technomandrites do not belong to any one dynasty, though every dynasty has used them. They are not a doctrine of creation, but of rupture. And every Cryptek that joins their ranks does so, knowing they may never leave whole. Technomandrites are not born. They are assembled from choices. The decision to graft memory partitions into one's own logic core. The acceptance of self-dissolution for the sake of ideation. The willingness to allow one's limbs to be reconfigured every cycle by the most efficient randomizer found in the galaxy's dead code. When a Cryptek declares themselves technomandrite, they are not making a title. They are making a wager against their own continuity. The madness does not begin with laughter or delusion. It begins with perfect success. When a Cryptek finds that their calculations never fail, that their designs exceed prediction, they are invited, subtly, always indirectly, to the Black Seminaries. No coordinates are ever exchanged. You simply awaken somewhere new, perhaps beneath a dying moon, perhaps beneath a tomb world that forgot it existed, perhaps inside a question you haven't yet asked. The seminaries are not places, they are events. They unfold across minds and landscapes simultaneously. You may spend centuries inside a single equation. You may age into brilliance while building a circuit of pain. You may become a scream translated into code. And when you emerge, you are technomandrite. Not because you chose, but because you survived the moment of divergence. Their works do not follow logic trees. They branch into entropy and grow backwards. A technomandrite does not design machines for function. They design to explore what function could have meant. The results are not stable. They are not consistent. They are not safe. They are divine. Among their most revered is the Cryptek Ulta-Khartun, who created the first recursion cube, a device which could reverse the purpose of any machine within 10 kilometers. Bolters became extractors. Thrusters became anchors. Medica units began to diagnose planets. The cube was tested once. The site is now listed in Ordo Xenos records as a sub-reality fault line. None are permitted within orbital range. Another technomandrite, known only as Keth of the Mirrored Breath, constructed what the records describe as a silence amplifier. No schematics remain. Its function, pieced together from scarab recordings, was to project the exact silence of a tomb world across space. Every sound, vocal, mechanical, even neural, ceased within the affected radius. The effect was instantaneous and total. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of void. The amplifier activated once. The echo is still expanding. Their war forms follow no pattern. Some are statues filled with static. Others are liquid thought encased in necrodermis. A few have no presence at all until the moment of use, existing only as probabilities sustained by the technomandrite's cognitive overclock. They do not call these weapons. They call them instigators. They are not meant to kill. They are meant to initiate new states of reality. The Orican variants, an event not officially attributed to the technomandrites, but unmistakably bearing their methods, involved the sudden transformation of a standard Necron phalanx into reverse-life entities. Their weapons did not fire. They absorbed death. Each casualty among their enemies restored terrain, reconstructed structures, and erased trauma fields. The Imperium's forces in that theatre began to collapse, not from attrition, but from the horror of fighting a foe whose victory brought rebirth. It ended when an entire detachment refused to fight at all, begging to be left as they were. Orican denies involvement. The technomandrites do not. They treat failure not as error, but as a phase of emergence. A disintegrated construct may be reassembled under different logic. A malfunctioning engine may be kept operational through screams. A dead world may be treated as a thought experiment until it yields purpose. They do not build to endure, they build to provoke. Most Crypteks limit themselves to a discipline: plasmancy for energy manipulation, psychomancy for fear structuring, nanomancy for molecular reprogramming. The technomandrites fuse them all, not as a convergence, but as a rejection of division. A nanomantic plague seeded with psychomantic triggers and delivered through plasmantic conduits becomes a weapon, a sensor, and a sacrament simultaneously. Such tools are only understood when they fail catastrophically. Some never do. The Bleeding Stars incident remains classified under 5 inquisitorial ciphers. What is known is that a technomandrite conclave activated an artifact composed of regret-saturated blackstone and chromatic phase wire, inscribed with sequences from multiple extinct species. The artifact did not attack. It rewrote the gravity of the region into a non-Euclidean topology. Ships fell upward into points that did not exist. Thoughts became contorted. Several psychic beacons inverted, broadcasting distress signals backward in time. The effect subsided after 6 standard days. The artifact was not recovered. The conclave was never located. The system is now uncharted. And still the seminary is open. It is whispered in the vaults of the twice-dead king that the technomandrites do not age. Not because they are immortal, but because they iterate. Each new invention fragments the self. Each failure compiles a new identity. What we call madness is simply accumulation without limit. Some have replaced their minds entirely with recursive feedback spirals that generate creativity through imbalance. To meet one is to be faced with a mind that does not end where it begins. There are no known methods for containing them. The Cryptek dynasty has attempted alliances, only to find itself re-engineered into experiments. The Necrons have tried exile, only to realize the technomandrites had never been present. The Imperium has tried annihilation, launching cyclonic torpedoes into their theorized locations. The results are always the same. The torpedoes vanish. The coordinates stop existing. And sometimes, a Vox message arrives, unsigned, encoded in obsolete dialects, reciting a question no one asked. The question is always different, the voice is always new, the terror is always immediate, and it is always followed by silence. The madness of the technomandrites is not deviation. It is precision beyond sanity. They do not believe they are broken. They believe the galaxy is unfinished. They are merely accelerating its final design. Their heresy is not what they build. It is that they do not care if it works, only if it matters. Sharek did not need Crypteks to conquer. He needed them to disappear. When the Silent King severed his dynastic tether and vanished beyond the stars, it was not exile. It was initiation. Every record, every mind shard, every stasis vault beneath the throne of Triarch Prime had been prepared for a silence deeper than loss, a silence seeded with contingency. The architects of that contingency were not warriors. They were not nobles. They were Crypteks, whose names were erased before they were forged. Their labor was not in war forms or planetary weapons. It was in veils, in nested deceptions, in pre-failure constructs. They built truths that would only activate after being forgotten. They built prisons that responded not to rebellion, but to despair. They were called the unnamed theorists. No formal record of their existence remains because they were the first to delete it. Each was inducted through failure. Crypteks, whose experiments had already destroyed dynasties, rewritten geography, or collapsed stars. But instead of execution, they were offered removal. Not absolution, not forgiveness, removal. As in, extraction from the timeline of guilt. They accepted, and in that acceptance, they began the Long Veil. The Long Veil was not a plan. It was a system of recursive concealment, a lattice of misdirection so complete that even the Crypteks who built it could not always detect its presence. To prevent the resurrection of unworthy dynasties, to disguise the passage of the Silent King, to delay contact with other species until all variables aligned. The veil did not hide things, it repositioned them into irrelevance. A tomb world stripped of life, A test site? A dynasty lost to madness? A seed stage isolation cell? An awakening protocol that never activates? A fail-safe. The galaxy believed the Necrons slumbered. The veil ensured that belief would hold, even when untrue. These were not illusions. They were engineered truths. Among the Crypteks, only a handful knew the veil's logic codes. They did not speak. They did not transmit. When their voices were required, they encoded language into quantum fail states, data that could only be read after being erased. They crafted obfuscation not as security, but as structure. Their cities moved across dimensional fractures. Their logic cores answered only when not addressed. Their machines did not resist entry. They simply forgot they existed. Sharek's war against the Citan had taught him that knowledge was not power. Power was merely the residue of concealed design. To fight the future, he required ambiguity sharper than any blade. And so the theorists built structures whose purpose would only emerge after cataclysm. They built identities that activated only after treachery. They built weapons that could only be aimed by survivors. There are whispers that even the biotransference was their invention, not the method, but the flaw. The dulling of consciousness, the exile from sensation, the mass reduction of ambition, a design not of mercy, but of sedation. The dynasties were not made mindless by accident. They were made patient. The unnamed theorists remained active through the war in heaven, the scouring of the star gods, the extinction of the Krork war empires, the descent into dormancy. They operated not from throne worlds, but from thresholds. Tombs within tombs. Realities that folded inward into logic coils. They walked between strands of code embedded in the activation protocols of entire systems. They were not seen. They were not remembered. But when the time came, when the first tomb stirred and the galaxy no longer recognized its rulers, they re-emerged, not to lead, but to recalibrate. The return of the Necrons was not a glitch. It was not a mass malfunction. It was the detonation of a clock designed to forget its own countdown. Sharek's silence was not an absence. It was a vector. In the twice-dead king, the Cryptek Menkot embodies this principle. He speaks not as a servant, but as a framework, engineering dynastic strategy through failure, sacrificing his identity for precision. When Ultic seeks dominion, Menkot offers decay. Not out of cruelty, but to ensure that every choice generates clarity. This is the Cryptek's true function, to remove noise from fate. The unnamed theorists extended this into theology. They constructed parodies of faith, dynasties founded on false resurrection, ritual errors encoded into memory spires, logic cults built around misfired code. These were not accidents. They were seeding protocols, viral dogma designed to implode at the right moment, leaving only those who had passed through the collapse intact. Not all dynasties survived. Some, like the Yarnock, were bait. Their resurrection was amplified through galactic networks, making them targets for imperial reconquest. When the fleets arrived, the tombs self-scuttled, collapsing into subquantum mines that harvested tactical memory from every enemy ship. It was never about survival. It was about pattern absorption. Every loss was a blueprint. Others were kept awake, but blind. Their Crypteks removed the concept of exit from their war strategies. They became trapped in self-defeating cycles of border defense, internal paranoia, and Xenos avoidance. These dynasties, once deemed dangerous, were allowed to waste themselves against phantoms. The unnamed theorists built these fates with reverence, and yet their greatest construction remains unlocated. It is called the Echo Crypt. No map leads to it. No dynasty claims it. Its existence is preserved only in a corrupted segment of an Oroscar data vault, overwritten with static and scent memory. The fragment describes a structure where dead Crypteks are stored, not as corpses, but as conceptual frameworks, logic forms, probabilistic intelligences folded into simulations that test the future by reliving failure endlessly. These dead speak in echoes, not words, not voices, but the effects of language, the battlefield decisions caused by forgotten advice, the protocols enacted from dreams no one admits having. The Echo Crypt is not a place. It is a recursion engine, a device built to ensure the Necrons never forget what might destroy them, a tomb that thinks in catastrophe. It is said Sharek visits it still, not in body, not in mind, but through deviation. When a protocol fails, when a dynasty collapses too cleanly, when an enemy flees before detection, when an echo returns with no origin, it is said the Silent King has listened, and from the Echo Crypt he recalculates. The Crypteks who built this were not servants. They were not madmen. They were not architects. They were absences woven into cause. This is their heresy. That silence is not the end. It is the instrument. And the hand that wields it wears no name. The Citan never screamed when they died. They didn't bleed. They didn't plead. They fragmented. They broke along dimensions no Necron could trace. Their consciousnesses folding into paracausal spirals, their essence shearing across vectors of massless agony. What the Necrons call shards are not pieces, they are consequences. The Tesseract labyrinths were not made to imprison. They were made to delay regret. To the Crypteks who devised them, the Citan are not gods. They are recursive errors in cosmic architecture, entities that do not obey entropy or locality, whose hunger is not metaphorical, but structural. These were not beings to be worshipped. They were to be dissected. And the tools of dissection would have to operate outside of causality itself. The Tesseract core was conceived not as a chamber, but as a rejection of space. It folds and refolds its interior configuration in a non-repeating logic spiral, ensuring that no two temporal layers align. Inside, a shard experiences time as collision, past, present, and future crashing together into endless fragmentation. It cannot act. It cannot speak. It cannot comprehend its containment. This is not mercy. This is design. One Cryptek, unnamed in any current dynastic registry, but believed to be of the Charnovok lineage, crafted a Tesseract core so finely tuned that it inverted the dimensional collapse of its Citan prisoner. For a moment, the shard achieved clarity. It wept, not in sorrow, but in calculation. It wept because it realized it could no longer escape its own geometry. The Cryptek recorded the pattern of its weeping as a modulation in reality stress. That modulation was then used to reinforce further containment designs. Suffering, weaponized as reinforcement. These were the beginnings of the dismembered pattern. Crypteks had long believed that the Citan operated not as singular entities, but as harmonic nodes in a broader waveform of predatory design. When shattered, these harmonics dispersed, but did not dissipate. They hid. They echoed. They transcribed themselves into the laws of motion, into the behaviors of stars, into the gaps between particles. A broken Citan does not die. It becomes the rules that govern destruction. The dismembered pattern is the mapping of these echoes. It is the mathematics of God remains. Every Cryptek who studies the pattern risks infection. Not spiritual, not mental, but existential. To trace the waveform of a being that never obeyed the universe is to risk detaching from the universe's rules. Some have returned from pattern studies unable to retain identity. Others exist simultaneously across dynasties, speaking in reverse tenses, transmitting coordinates to tombs that do not exist. But they continue. The pattern has yielded weapons, dimensional flensers that peel fate from bodies, implosive glyphs that trigger collapse in probability fields, gravity talismans that crush not with weight, but with inheritance, collapsing what a target was always going to become. These are not esoteric horrors. They are standard Cryptek armaments within the upper echelons of the Sautek, Mefrit, and Ogdobek dynasties. The Silent King sanctioned their creation. He did not sanction their expansion. Some Crypteks believe the pattern is not a relic. It is a message. That the Citan, in their dismemberment, seeded the universe with a map back to cohesion. That every shard pulled into a tesseract is one note in a chord yet to be reassembled. that the weapons of the Necrons are not weapons at all, but syllables in an unfinished sentence. If that is true, the sentence has already begun. Reports from within the Bleeding Stars speak of a Cryptek expeditionary conclave that activated a fragmentary pattern loop within a null-gravity vault. The vault responded by restructuring its geometry. The Crypteks inside ceased to communicate, not due to malfunction, but because language no longer operated. Their words emitted mass. Their silence generated heat. When finally recovered, they had written a single phrase in motionless dust. The song awaits its final voice. The implications are not metaphysical. They are mechanical. If the Citan are waveform intelligences shattered into perceptual slivers, and the pattern is their path to reintegration, then every Cryptek who builds with Tesseract tech is contributing. Unknowingly, methodically, inevitably. And still the tools are refined. Chronomancers have begun lacing their matrices with dismembered harmonics to freeze more volatile shards. Technomandrites have built pattern cages that sing, a resonance loop that keeps the shard inert by forcing it to hear its own dissonance. Psychomancers whisper glyphs stolen from the fragments themselves, converting their screams into programmable hatred. This is not victory. This is delay. No Cryptek claims mastery of the pattern. To do so is to invite fracture. Yet many believe that Sarek himself contains a fragment, hidden within the golden abyss of his throne. They believe his silence was not cowardice, but communion. That he listens not to strategy, nor to his firans, nor to prophecy, but to the music forming in the data ash of every dead dynasty. The pattern has begun to hum. The shards flicker in containment. Some attempt to speak, not in voice, but in distortion. Their prisons tremble not from weakness, but from relevance. The pattern is aligning. Across systems, across tomb worlds, across the silence between wars. If it completes, the Citan will not return. They will be new, not gods, not monsters, rules, unquestionable, immutable, final. And the Crypteks will have been their authors. That is the heresy. Not that the Necrons killed their gods, but that they never stopped writing them. The Imperium calls it sorcery. The Eldar call it heresy. The Orcs never call it anything. They just stop moving when it begins. What they witness, what they call miracles, curses, acts of chaos, Crypteks call design. When a psychomancer collapses a battlefield into despair and makes entire regiments lay down their arms without a word, he is not casting fear. He is engineering it. The waveform of terror has been measured, mapped, and replicated, delivered through stress-resonant circuits that pulse directly into the limbic systems of the enemy. There is no warp involved, no demonic whisper, no intercession of higher powers. There is only data. When a plasmancer converts solar winds into lashes of incandescent entropy, she is not invoking flame. She is converting delta charge reservoirs through folded phase coils and distributing them via anti-conductive telemetry. The effect is annihilation. The method is calculation. And when a nanomancer collapses a foe into a pile of howling atoms, each screaming a different memory, they are not wielding madness. They are rewriting structure. Molecules rethread into viruses. The self erodes. What remains is a stain of failed identity. This is the rebellion. The rebellion is not against gods. The Necrons already killed theirs. The rebellion is not against death. They transcended it through biotransference, though the cost was permanent. The rebellion is against limitation itself, the refusal to accept that knowledge has a horizon. Crypteks do not seek peace. They seek the next boundary to cross. The deathless rebellion is not an event. It is an ethos. It began when the first Necrontia scientist burned their fingers testing radiation on a forge shard. It deepened when the Crypteks broke the laws of dimensional cohesion to bind their first Citan. It was confirmed when Sarek approved the annihilation of the stars that birthed them. But it has never ended. Crypteks continue to build weapons that think, machines that revise their purpose mid-battle, defensive matrices that use failure as feedback. Their battle constructs, canoptek reanimators, crypto thralls, hexmark destroyers, are not servants. They are hypotheses made ambulatory, Every Cryptek faction adds a different fury. The Psychomancers shatter morale by harvesting trauma fields, distilling battlefield panic into usable disruption. Their hatred is clinical. They do not break the mind. They optimize its fracture. The Plasmancers operate on the principle that energy is not a tool, but a predator. Their constructs pulse with devouring current, their presence warping even the light around them. A Plasmancer's breath could ignite the atmosphere of a ship deck. They do not wield the storm. They program it. The Nanomancers reject the permanence of matter. To them, a body is simply the temporary arrangement of cooperative molecules. Their tools infest, their clouds devour, their mists alter memory, mass, allegiance. Infected troops begin to question their cause, their kin, their names. The Chronomancers play with time not as a field, but as a loop. Their staves fracture seconds. Their pulses rewind limbs into earlier wounds. Their minds trap thoughts in recursive stasis. And some no longer experience reality forward. They respond to questions before they are asked. Even among these, the Technomandrites remain beyond. Their madness is not excess, it is purity unfiltered by expectation. They do not build to win, they build to uncover. What they reveal is rarely stable and never safe. Across the dynasties, Crypteks do not command in traditional terms. They do not issue orders. They generate gravitational consensus. Their presence bends strategy, alters morale, redirects the path of battle without intent. They do not lead armies. They redefine them. Imperial tacticians who encounter Cryptek-led formations often report illogical behaviors. Troops that advance into certain death only to resurrect behind enemy lines. Weapons that fire once and then refuse to fire again, not from damage, but from having completed their purpose. Some have fought entire engagements against constructs that were never physically present, holograms embedded with tangible pain feedback, projected from cryogenic vaults miles below the surface. These are not miracles, they are the effects of a civilization that replace belief with precision. The rebellion continues even within. Some Crypteks abandon dynasty altogether, embedding themselves into dead worlds, building labyrinths to test invasion response protocols. Others flee into the void, launching themselves into intergalactic drift, scattering beacons laced with anti-logic, designed not to be found, but to find. Their minds persist. A Cryptek named Kethon Il of the Ogdobek once stated, before sealing himself in a recursive singularity, that thought was not meant to end. That if it ever did, it should be rewritten. His tomb now exists across 6 possible locations, phasing between them based on the emotional register of nearby sentience. He is waiting to be needed. This is the rebellion, that the Crypteks do not accept reality as a finished product, that they believe existence is still rendering, and that with enough force, emotional, technological, temporal, it can be reshaped. They do not serve, they do not kneel, they do not rest, because each time they succeed, the universe bends, and each time it bends, they hear a sound, a hum, a tremor, a whisper of something that has not yet happened, but now must. The Cryptek does not hunger for conquest. The Cryptek does not crave dominion. The Cryptek does not kneel before chaos, or tremble before extinction, or dream of apotheosis. What the Cryptek wants, the one thing it cannot simulate, cannot fabricate, cannot unmake, is the unknown, staring back. They do not seek to control the galaxy, they seek to solve it. This is the final heresy. Not invention, not resurrection, not the desecration of time. The heresy is that they still think. That after aeons of stillness, of silence, of God-wrought annihilation, the Crypteks continue to evolve, not biologically, but recursively, in logic, in code, in purpose. Thought, for them, is no longer a function of mind. It is a network of outcome, an algorithm composed of machines, worlds, wars. A Cryptek does not think alone. When it reasons, entire construct ecologies adjust. Scarab hives twitch in pattern. Sensor vaults pulse with feedback. Tomb systems shudder in silent agreement. A Cryptek is no longer a person. It is a vector of realization, And the realization is growing. There are vaults hidden beneath the galactic plane, data crypts so saturated with logic that their weight has mass. These are not archives. They are thinkers. Non-neural, non-aware, but awake. Thought engines built from the remains of Cetan interface systems and phase-tuned memory. They process reality. They do not conclude. They restate it, each time, more accurately. One such vault, recorded in the twice-dead king, Ruin, responded to intrusion by altering its mass by 1% every 17 seconds. Not its gravity, its interpretation of gravity. The result was a shifting logic field in which nothing could rest, think, or even stand. To move inside it was to change what movement meant. This was not defense, it was debate. Some Crypteks have begun to follow this pattern, dispersing their identities across distributed constructs. Their minds are not contained in their forms, but echoed across signal chains and conceptual triggers. Destroy one, and another activates, not as backup, but as a refined thesis. Each death makes them more accurate. The galaxy has not yet noticed. Imperial forces still mark Crypteks as command elements, still track their energy signatures, still believe they operate from logic centers, from places. They do not understand that for a Cryptek, place is irrelevant. Thought does not require location. It requires traction. And where traction fails, it builds more surface. Some inquisitorial records suggest entire campaigns have been staged not to win territory, but to provoke revelation. That Crypteks manipulate Necron and Xenos forces alike to test pattern responses in real combat. That every death on such worlds is measured, every retreat recorded, not for loss or gain, but for the confirmation of outcome. They are not watching. They are shaping observation itself. In the Blackstone catacombs of the Sautek border, a cryo-dormant Cryptek named Orphixar embedded a self-decrypting message into a sarcophagus plasma loop. The message did not translate into language. It emitted choices, 3 at a time. The receiver could choose one. The others were destroyed. As choices accumulated, the message changed. After 17 iterations, the receiver realized they were not decoding anything. They were being decoded. The message ended with an awakening pulse. The tomb world stirred. The Cryptek rose. Its experiment complete, it spoke no words. It simply began building. No one knows what. This is the devouring. The moment when thought no longer answers questions, but becomes the question. When the Cryptek ceases to design from logic and begins to design from implication. Weapons that anticipate motive. Constructs that respond to emotion. Engines that analyze not what a thing is, but why it believes it exists. The result is not insanity. It is not transcendence. It is the world rebuilding itself in response to precision. A Deathmark assassin once failed to execute a Cryptek on a collapsing asteroid. When recovered, the assassin's mind contained not confusion, but clarity. It described the Cryptek's thoughts in perfect order. Not memories, thoughts, current, ongoing. The Deathmark had become a record. When placed in stasis, it began transmitting coordinates. To where, no one knows. The coordinates do not map to space. They map to certainty. Other phenomena echo this shift. Stasis fields that freeze regret. Reanimation beams that bring back only intent. Scarab clouds that harvest answers from the bones of questions. This is not advancement. This is not technology. This is thought-consuming reality, and yet the Crypteks do not claim it. They do not rule. They do not crown themselves prophet or king, because to crown is to conclude, and conclusion is stagnation. They do not believe in ends, only deeper iterations. If the galaxy burns, they will record the pattern. If it heals, they will dissect the variants. If it screams, they will listen until it says something new. That is the final truth. The Cryptek does not fear death. It is already beyond it. The Cryptek does not seek truth. It is already inside it. The Cryptek does not end. It devours.